Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. If you've come here via YouTube and want to know more about what we do, as always, just head over to officehours.global. That's our primary web portal for more information and links about the show. Also, remember that your questions drive the conversation here. And you can also, if you want to get a question in really easily, use the QR code that'll appear down at the bottom of this. It'll put you right into the question system, and you can add questions for today's main show or our special guest. And we have a very special guest in our second hour today. Surround sound expert and longtime Hollywood re-recording mixer John Ross will be here, dropping by to discuss the future of sound in film and much more. And he's worked on a stunning A-list of films from the Austin Powers movies all the way down through Bombshell, American Hustle, and many, many more. Be a fascinating second hour today. You can also ask questions for John, by the way, if you're in our second hour Makana system, so check that out. But this is our first hour. Mitch, what general questions do we have in the mix for today?
I'll turn it over to Courtney.
Me.
Oh, Courtney.
Thank you.
I apologize.
Thank you, Bill. Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida says the Sony FR7 firmware update released with a 709 tone bass. What is 709 tone bass? He's got a link to their announcement.
Mitchell, start us off.
We kind of asked this or answered this question yesterday because we were talking about firmware upgrades from other Sony cameras. And I saw the words 709 tone. It has nothing to do with sound. I'm not sure if it's a branded Sony name or just a thing, but what it refers to is the ability to adjust the 709 inside HDR. So it's nice to know that that's there. I don't know how it works or what it does because none of these firmware releases are out there. But in anticipation of HDR, it sounds like a good idea.
Alex?
Yeah, this is not it doesn't appear to be this appears to be a setup for the camera. And from my understanding, it's really designed to allow the camera to interact with broadcast cameras more effectively. So this is going to get it into a color space that is closer to the broadcast cameras and will allow it to match those. Otherwise, it kind of sits in a much different setting. So that's we think that's what that is. Like Mitch, until we put it in the camera, we won't see exactly what it does.
There you go. Next question.
Next one comes in from Douglas Carmichael. Oh, yes. And he says, Mitchell mentioned the Sony FX3 and 30 firmware updates that can transmit in SRT or RTMP. What would be the use case for SRT RTMP from the camera via Wi-Fi as opposed to a software switcher or hardware encoder connected via Ethernet?
Guy Cochran's going to start us off here. Guy?
Yeah, there's quite a few camera manufacturers that have been doing this for a while, and SRT, Secure Reliable Transport, is a way of getting that signal up to, let's say, the cloud or just to another remote location. It actually isn't via Wi-Fi. You can use any generic USB to Ethernet adapter and hardwire it. So like my Zcam has SRT in it, and the way that I use this is I'm able to push my signal directly up to the cloud without using an additional encoder. I haven't seen Sony's yet since the firmware hasn't been released, but the bummer is that usually on these is you don't get all the fine tuning. So some of us like to really tune our SRT to get not just throw a bunch of bandwidth at it, because you can cure stuff with just throwing it up to like 10 megabit or 15 megabit, but sometimes you like to dial it in. And so I'm excited to see this firmware update to see how much tuning ability there is to be able to get RTMP and SRT.
Mitchell.
I wouldn't trust a Sony to be a 3.9 service with streaming like that because the CPU and the Sony cameras just aren't built for that type of usage. I would highly recommend you go to a purpose-built hardware encoder for that type of work and just connect the camera as a camera. I've had problems using the Sony with wireless, not the adapter that goes from USB to Ethernet, but wireless talking to Monitor Plus. It's about 80% accurate. It just disconnects when it feels like it. And the whole menu system in the Sony is a little bit pokey too. So it's just telling me that the CPU may not be up to the task of doing SRT for something that's mission critical.
Alex?
I do think that within the next 5 years or so, almost every camera will be able to stream something. Being able to deliver what's coming to the sensor to SRT minimum, I think is going to be something that a lot of cameras do because you want to be able to have them contribute across networks, across the country, across the world. And so, I see where Sony's going with that. I do have the similar concerns over taking a camera that wasn't built for this from the ground up and kind of updating the firmware and trying to push the sensor a little bit further. We have enough problems with the FX30 and the Sony cameras with heat, like adding more to what it's doing. I don't have a lot of confidence in that I would probably use it that much in this area. I'd rather have them build a camera that had the chips and everything else that was kind of built for it, as opposed to something that is there. Now, I will say that it's using the FX30 and the FX3, which have fans and some ventilation, but I do have a lot of concerns about Sony adding too much into the cameras because I already have a lot of trouble. I'm using one. Like I obviously have figured it out, but I find that they're, from a processing perspective, there's a lot of challenges with the Sony cameras of them being asked to do a little bit more than what they were originally built for.
Let's go to the next question.
Next question comes in from Madison, Indiana, and Roscoe Jones, where he asks, where have you gotten the best feedback, unintended, on how your mic sounds? Can you trust a recording after the fact, or are a separate set of ears the best help?
What is the highest quality feedback you've heard lately? Mitchell, dive into this.
I don't know if you think back to when you first heard your voice in your headphones and then played back to you on tape, it always sounded weird. I've been listening to myself on headphones for 40 some years and broadcasting, and maybe another 10 after that. So my best reference is myself, because I know how I sound and I know how I sound in my headphones. So I recommend that if you're a little bit more used to talking into a microphone with a set of headphones on, that you analyze yourself, because you know what sounds right, what doesn't. So if I were to go into B&H and I had a whole bunch of microphones lined up, I'd be wearing my favorite pair of headphones, speaking into it, because I know how it's supposed to sound back to me.
Alex?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to hear yourself on a lot of different mics. And we did a little bit of that yesterday. Like Mitchell, when I picked out mics for myself, I go in and I go through maybe 20 or 30 mics at a location and pick out the mic that, again, we can talk about all the quality of mics, but it really depends on how your voice sounds in that mic. And so as far as a personal mic, a lot of us have a collection of mics that we use for different things, shotgun mics and lav mics and headset mics. And so it just depends on what we're using and what clients we're using those with. So it can depend on those things. But from a personal perspective, I went through a lot of mics to kind of find it. And yesterday I went through more and I changed it again, because we did it, and I realized I hadn't done that recently. And when we in the new setup, when I tested this mic against the Stellar, I decided, well, I might give it a shot for a little while. So anyway, I think that's but you kind of want to keep on coming back to it as well.
Jeffrey Powers.
And a mic is only one factor in the whole scheme of things. I mean, it could be, where are you going to be using this mic in? Are you in a room? Are you in a hall? Are you with a bunch of people around you? Are you going to be singular? When it comes to doing some recordings from here, I like to use, and I can't remember the Waves plugin that I use, that basically shows the meter, and then of course looking at the specs for the microphone, seeing where the sweet spot is on the microphone, because if you can't get this microphone, like this is the MV7, and if you can't get this microphone close to your mouth, if it's far away, it's going to react a lot different than it is closer to the mouth. So you'll want to get a microphone that works best for you. If you don't want the microphone in shot, you want to get a shotgun microphone, then you'll have to figure out from there. But yeah, I go through a lot of different things. I used to love Skype for the fact that I could go and listen to my voice, because it was high-end recording, or high-end at the time for audio, and it really told you a lot about how it sounded around your room.
Mitchell Hill, coming back.
It's a lot like, and I think Alex kind of touched on it, it's a lot like a guitarist going in and trying out a bunch of guitars at Guitar Center. It's your own personal feedback that, if I want that Fender bass, it's going to sound a certain way. And the same thing with my microphones. I kind of compare everything to this little guy behind me, the U87 that I bought in 1979. And I know that mic really well, and it knows me, because I know how to work that microphone and get proximity, or to lean into it to get a little more personal. All of those things. So that's why you know your voice if you do voice a lot, and you're the best judge of how you should sound.
Alex?
And when you think about those mics, we can often say that you can use any mic, and it depends on it. But like a guitar player, to take Mitchell's example, can play any guitar and make it sound good. But when you talk to guitar players, there's a difference between the guitars that are made in China, Mexico, and the United States. so that like as far as the quality of those of where they are, and it's oftentimes it's very little things. I had a conversation with John McDermott from Stroke 9, and he was talking about the fact that he gets the Mexico strats, but then he has a guy realign all of the frets and then replace the pickups. So he goes, and then he gets the one he wants. So in the same way, I think mics, there is a reason that some mics are more expensive is because oftentimes the core components are a little higher quality.
And not to add even more complexity to it, but just also remember your voice changes over the course of time and over the course of performance. One of the things that I've noticed, I've mentioned before here that I'm starting to do audiobooks, if I have a long stretch and I have to do 2 or 3 hours of book narration, the next day my voice is weaker. It's no different than if you're running, a quarter of a mile kind of on a regular basis, and then you have to go out and run a half marathon. You're going to be sorer. You're just going to not have the same performance that you would over a shorter piece. So the amount you speak, the amount you announce also has an effect on your voice over time. And we've all woken up in the morning and gone, wow, I really have the low end of my voice. And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's not there anymore. Mitchell, you had another thought?
I just wanted to say that the coloration and the uniqueness of the mic, don't read the spec sheet and make a decision on what's right for you, because it's just not going to translate. We have some questions about different types of microphones on yesterday's test. And some cases, the price isn't necessarily the criteria. It's the sound and how it sounds with you.
Let's go to the next question.
Next one comes in from Paul Wallace, now in Starlink Plaza, Texas. And Paul asked the DJI Mic 2 with 2 transmitters and 1 receiver and a charging case is $349. What are the pros and cons?
Let's start with Jeffrey Powers here. Jeffrey?
So I got to use the DJI among a couple other microphones last week at CES, and I really like how the DJI mics worked. So the biggest con, I think, is that it's a range of 2.4 to 2.8 gigahertz. I'm not sure how they do that, but it's supposed to have some sort of ability to switch over frequencies if there's skipping or anything like that. The 2 transmitters, 1 receiver works really well in the fact that you can separate left and right for 2 different voices. However, I was using my main one. I was trying, these were the brand new Ceremonics, the Blink 500 B2Rs. So they actually record from the transmitter, and we're starting to see a lot of these like this. And a lot of the biggest problem with something like CES is everybody's using these. So when you are running around, you're going to get interference no matter what. You're going to get these weird skips. So it's nice to have the recording on here, because I've used that already to save a couple of my videos, because once you get about 4 feet away from the camera, it can start to cut out easily. The other problem that I always have with all of these microphones is the microphones are always pointing up. So if you don't have the microphone right here, pointing up to your mouth, you're not, like for instance, everybody puts it on their lapel like this. All of a sudden it's shooting over there. And so if you have a loud voice coming from over here, that's going to cause problems in your recording. So I'd love to see a company actually put the mic like right here so it would point up, because like I said, the majority of people are putting the microphone right here, or something more adjustable, or attenuation. That would be a great thing, like with the UHF mics, being able to dial down the background instead of the foreground. And I haven't seen one do that just yet.
Alex?
I bought one. I bought one there. I'm gonna put it in my backpack. Having a mic that is having a 2 transmitter, 1 receiver system that I can quickly and use. I don't think this is a replacement for Electrosonics or other higher end systems, but this is a great cost effective solution to get to be able to pull out an interview or be able to do something quick for streaming. I'm not a big fan of the little pill that people are now using it as a mic is not something that I probably will do very often. I may just clip it on. I mean, that's what makes it easy, is to have something that's there. But it does take a mic input, so you can have it has, I think, its own lav that it comes with, but you can definitely get one for it. And there's a variety of mics that you can plug into that. So I think that there's I think that you can up the quality a little bit that way. And I don't have a lot of strong. I don't think that this is a great mic for a contested environment like a convention, like a conference. I think that this is something you do when you're out where there's not a lot of other mics. And again, if you wear it, the one advantage of wearing it in the front and clipping it on like that is you're not going to do what you do with a normal lav, which is put it behind you. And then because once you get between the transmitter and the receiver, your range will drop a lot. By clipping it on, I think it helps them because you're not in front of it. So I think that that's one of the advantages of using it as a mic. Again, I don't have strong expectations of it's going to change the world, but I think that it's probably the best under $500 mic set or under $400 mic set there is right now.
Guy Cochran.
Yeah, Rode came out with the Go, which really opened up this channel for people that want to get low-cost wireless and get better sound. And so I appreciate that they're out on the market, but and I see them everywhere. They're everywhere, but when you actually listen to the sound of your critical sound person, you're going to notice that they do sound thinner. And some of them do have a microphone input. I don't think that this DJI one does, but the Rode definitely does. Chris is nodding his head. Does it actually have a microphone input? It does. So yeah, like this DPA mic's $500. So just the microphone on this one, it's fuller. It's got a fuller range, so 20 to 20. Their system, the DJI system, you'll lose some of the low end. So when you talk about fullness, like one of these large diaphragm or shotgun microphones, they're really full sounding. They don't sound thin. So that's my only gripe with these. I do appreciate that they have a USB input. So if you want to just hook the receiver right into a computer, that's really awesome that you can just skip an adapter. You just go USB right in. So I like them for that. And I do like them for like yoga instructors, people that corporate stuff where it's just better sound because, a lot of these YouTubers, they're just shooting with their phone and unless they're within 5 feet, they're not getting a great sound. So pros and cons. But yeah, the other thing you get with a Pro is that somebody's monitoring the sound. When you've got a dedicated sound person, they're writing the levels, they're monitoring the sound. A lot of times with these phones, people are just like set it and forget it. And so that's nice when it does have 32-bit to be able to save that sound in case the levels are off. So you got a couple things going on there. You might have to fix it in post, so to speak. So there is still value in having a professional sound person with $20,000 worth of gear, in addition to just being able to save the day because they could scan for frequencies and get a frequency that's not going to take a hit.
Chris Fenwick.
I may be wrong about the mic output. I was looking at something else. So I think this is a great pretend microphone. I think it's a really great pretend mic. It's not super pro, it's not broadcast, but for a lot of YouTubers and stuff, it's better than just using the mic that's on your camera. It's better than, or the mic that's on your phone. My biggest beef about it, and the pill thing, Alex, I totally agree. It's whatever. But my biggest beef about it is they have their logo is gigantic on the front of the pill. So if you are going to use the pill, you may as well get paid by DJI for advertising for them. I will say, however, they have a little magnetic thing. So if you've ever tried to, mic somebody like with a silk blouse or something like that, tram vampire clips, please. But they have this little magnetic backing thing. So it might be too high if it's on a t-shirt, but I can just stick it right here. So I like that thing, the magnetic.
Courtney.
Yeah, the pill thing I think was the Holy Land we were looking at, not the DJI. The DJI, I have the version 1, and it does have a logo on it. A little bit of black electrical tape will take care of that for you. I think the new ones, we can go look at the comparison between the version 2 and the original one. I have the original one. Number 2 is a little bit bigger. You'll notice the case is bigger because they added this scroll wheel and encoder and a push and scroll encoder on the receiver. So the receiver is about a quarter inch wider. And I think the transmitters are a little bit wider too. And an interesting thing that nobody else has talked about yet is there's active intelligent noise canceling in the new ones and the transmitters. So apparently The original one did not have that. You have the same amount of 14 hours, but the new one records 32-bit. The old one didn't. Battery life is a little bit better in the new ones. USB-C and Lightning, it had that before. It has the same cables, USB-C, etc. Let's see, the touchscreen, and this one has a dial on it, which is new. They both will let you plug in external lavaliers into them. So it has that. The new ones have a different arrangement of the microphone on the top. This one, it has the microphones just kind of exposed, and the new one has kind of a curved grill on the top of it. It's plastic that's smooth. So if you're hiding it underneath a layer of clothing, it won't rub as much. They both do have a 1/8-inch jack for microphone input on the top. And the new one supposedly has Bluetooth in it. And I'm not sure, I didn't read exactly how it uses those Bluetooth. Is the Bluetooth connection, in addition to the 2.4 gigahertz, regular connection, is the Bluetooth used for monitoring the transmitter, or is the Bluetooth coming out of the receiver so that the receiver then can connect to a phone headset or be monitored wirelessly? I'm not sure whether that Bluetooth transmitter is in each of the transmitters, and if it's in each of the transmitters, how do you control which one you hear?
It's the receiver.
It's the receiver. Yeah. Okay, so that comes in handy for being able to monitor. You can put some, your wireless earbuds in, and use that for monitoring, which comes in quite handy. It also has a headphone jack on the receiver where you can plug in a separate wired headphone if you need.
Jeffrey, you have a quick follow-up?
Yeah, first of all, Bluetooth, it does help talk back and forth if the Wi-Fi is getting interrupted, so it can work from there. To Guy's point, exactly about the editing, I have a settings that I go to, and I worked hard to get it for each microphone, but of course that's going to change from there. And then the one thing I do like about this DJI is the new receiver. A lot of the receivers are the same pill size as the transmitters. This one's got a thing where you can actually hook it up next to the camera. It's a nice pronounced LCD right there, so you can see the what's coming in, what's going out. For somebody like myself, if I'm doing a one-on-one interview, I always glance over there to make sure that both of them are working, and it's nice to actually see that without having to kind of work around trying to find the little pill.
Alex?
Yeah, and probably the number one use for this is going to be actually working. It's YouTubers that are going to use it in post, and that 32-bit is going to make such a huge difference because they are going. So we keep on thinking about it breaking up for live, but really the use case is you throw it on, you transmit it, and insert it into your camera so that you have sync. You just have it in there so that you have some kind of audio on your camera while you're recording. That way you can do walk and talks. You can do a lot of other things, and you have those mics that are there. You're then going to resync those later. So the transmission, it breaking up is probably not as important as we make it out to be because it has that recording. I do wonder how much they're spending with Zaxcom for that patent. so that's usually something that they protect vigorously. Being able to do a transmission and record is something at the transmission end has something that's been held folks up for a long time. So a couple companies are breaking through that.
Chris, do you have a quick finish?
Real quick. As an editor, I would love to know how many people actually use the recorded file that's recorded in the thing.
A lot of YouTubers do, 100%. Yeah, because it breaks up all the time. Like they're walking around, they're doing it, not 100% of the time, but I'm saying they absolutely do the being able to record at that on the person is a huge deal for them. And the 32-bit means that they can make a lot of mistakes and still recover that audio.
I understand the logic of it. I'd just like to know the actual figures of how many people do.
The problem is that there's enough, I've actually talked to some folks about it. There's enough hits on the transmission that it becomes an issue that they have to do it because, it's not, it works mostly really well, but you hear even with us with high-end electrosonics, you can have little hits in the audio and so on and so forth. So you end up going back to that record anyway and it's easier than fixing it. It's easier just to replace it. It doesn't take very long.
Yeah, with CES Unveiled, I had to replace all the audio with what was recorded on the transmitter. But when I got on the show floor, it was a lot better. So it really is hit or miss. You can't really tell when it's going to work, when it's not going to work.
All right, let's move on. Next question.
From Josh Lynch in Burbank, California. He says, when live switching SuperSource presets, built-in companion, on an ATEM Extreme SDI switcher, I always see a frame or two that's messy looking and not a clean switch. Is this just a limitation of the ATEM's processor?
Alex?
Yeah, this is because it's a macro. I think that what you're doing here, I mean, if you're cutting to it, I think that you're doing a macro. If you're just cutting to a SuperSource, you shouldn't. Built-in companion. Yeah. So if you're using SuperSources in companion is running a macro. And in that macro, I believe, and in that macro, it is making a bunch of requests, and those requests aren't necessarily lining up with time. And so you're getting these kind of bad frames. What you will find is that if you use something like Mix Effect Pro, you're not going to have that problem. So Mix Effect Pro is going to allow you to, it will transition between those much more effectively than any kind of companion setup. Now, you could have companion talk to Mix Effect Pro and have Mix Effect Pro talk to the switcher, but Mix Effect Pro has a much better interaction because the companion modules are using the publicly available APIs, and the Mix Effect Pro is talking to the mixer in a much deeper way. There was a lot of research that Adam put into that. So it's not, he's not using just the publicly available APIs to make that work, and that's why his works so much better.
Let's get to the next question.
From Wilmington, Delaware, and right here on the panel, Mitchell Hill says, now that Jeffrey Powers has returned from CES, what company had the most interesting new product?
From our man on the show floor, Jeffrey, take over.
You know, that's the problem with CES is the main floor is 33 football fields long, and then of course you have the Venetian, then you have the upper area, and then the Aria, which is basically, you know, a lot of crypto, a lot of over-the-top television. I don't even go to the Aria for that. So there's a ton of stuff. A lot of AI, as we did talk about before, but not as much as I really expected it to be. When it came to the main show floor, the transparent TVs were big from LG, from Samsung, which is really nice. But I always see it as that second screen overlay rather than watching a TV and then trying to see something behind it. But it's great for, if you're doing like a window dressing type thing. I think it's perfect from there. I showed, and Guy has a picture of it because I don't have my screen share on.
For the Shift Cam.
Yeah, this is the Shift Cam. I did a couple interviews in private suites. Now, the Shift Cam is meant for your iPhone, and of course, they're coming out with the iPhone 15 model very soon that has a lot of features, including adding lenses, adding whatever you need to do it. And it's all, it's using the MagSafe for the phone, and of course got a handle, and then they're working on storage options for the 15. They're working on extra options for the 15. I also stopped by the PTZ Optics booth. PTZ Optics has they're coming out with some new software that's web-based, and from my understanding, and don't take me word for word on it because it hasn't come out yet, is that you can connect up and become the TD for somebody's PTZ cameras, which is pretty cool. So a lot of remote options are going from there. Went to Canon's booth, saw their updates on their PTZ lines. They were heavily more on the whole idea of VR. So I got to sit, you sit at a table and you watch a basketball game from the first person, and then you went over to the other station. First person, and you went over to another station, you sat at a table, and then you got to watch the game from the table, like little players running back and forth, shooting hoops and things like that. That was a lot of fun. When it came over to Eureka Park, I saw some innovation. I saw this really cool AI head that actually it did everything. It could translate. It could even become Yoda and give you answers like Yoda would, which was really interesting. But for the most part, a lot of AI translation apps are coming out. So and some of them are doing it in close to real time as possible. So you could be watching something in Chinese, but you're listening to it and you're seeing their lips, and it's like they're talking English. And that's pretty amazing as well. And that's the stuff I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you for the tour through there. CES is the largest trade show in Las Vegas, and as such, there's tons to see. Let's head off to our next question.
Coming in from Andy Kokendorfer in Vieira, Florida. Andy says, thoughts on the small Mackie DLZ Creator XS, NDI audio, I/O, 2-channel auto mix, etc. And he has a link there.
Jeffrey?
What I like about it is it's got a lifted head to it. So as opposed to the Rode, where they're just basically a small incline, this has a little incline and then brings it up a little bit more, so you can kind of see the screen a little bit better. The one thing that kind of disappointed me was they're getting away from their musician roots. And right now you have many different 2-person podcast units out there. What I would love to have seen would be a 4-channel, 4 XLRs coming in for the people that are musicians and are doing live streams, because that is the one thing that is missing, being able to actually connect up 4 different XLR sources and then run them through the podcast. You can put this into two different computers. You can also you have also the buttons, so you can customize however you want to set it up. So it, for the most part, I haven't heard it yet. I was going to go. I'm not going to NAMM this year, but I'm pretty sure that they're going to be showing that off at NAMM. So, and I know that Office Hours is going to be going to NAMM for a little bit. So hopefully they can get in the Mackie booth and check this out.
Alex.
Yeah, it looks pretty impressive. I don't know if I would need it I don't know if it would line up for a musician either way, but I would say that 2 inputs seems like anemic. Even for a podcast studio, I'd want to see 4 typically. If I'm going to have something on site. I do think it was a little interesting. I'm curious about the NDI, if it's just doing NDI audio or doing something where it's doing NDI video that has audio on it. But it looks like it might be NDI audio that's going straight in so that it can supply that there. So I think that's an interesting piece. I do think Mackie has been experimenting in this area for a very long time, and I think that this is a refinement to things that they've already been working on. So it will be interesting to see. With Mackie, my experience has generally been that the preamps are a little noisy, and so that's usually bothered me a fair bit. So I've owned a lot of Mackie, a lot of Mackie mixers, and that's why I don't own them right now. So it'd be really interesting. I'd want to test it and see how the preamps sound as we kind of move forward there.
Courtney.
I think what they're going after here is the podcaster market, because I don't think they've had a mixer tailored to that market just yet, and that's why the 2 mic inputs, and it does have other inputs. It has 2 1/4-inch TRS inputs for secondary, so you can bring a laptop or a Bluetooth headset, so you can bring it has a Bluetooth connection, so you can bring callers in over the phone, etc. It's very similar. It's aimed at a kind of a pared down version of the Rodecaster Pro. Its target price right now, MSRP, is $500. It is not available yet. I guess you can pre-order them. So none of us have heard it. It has rotary knobs. I like the slider knobs on the Rodecaster a little bit better, because it gives you a little finer control, and you can feel where they are with your fingers without having to look at it, which might be important in a podcaster mode. And it has 3 different modes of operation. So it's kind of designed for novices. It's got an easy, and you can change it. It's got an easy mode, an enhanced mode, and a pro mode. Pro mode gives you complete access to the EQ and limiters, etc. Whereas easy mode has this assistant that guides you through the setup, and it will do auto mix, and it'll also do auto gain staging for you, which is where most people get their audio setup wrong. So it is not designed kind of more for the novice, I think, podcaster than the professional podcaster.
So I threw up a picture of the back of the mixer just for a little bit, because look at the branding they've done about the Onyx preamps in there. Now that is Mackie's higher end. I'm not saying it's the best preamps in the world, but they're obviously making it a thing because they actually have that in big type on the back of it. So fingers crossed. Let's see when the reports start coming in of actual use in the field.
That's interesting that you had a I've been seeing a 2-channel, but you had 4 inputs on that. So that must be a different version of the model, right?
Well, this just, that's from Mackie DLZ Creator 12-channel digital mixer. And here's the form factor
I think
of it.
That's the older model.
6-channel
is that the old?
Is the new one, yeah.
Ah, maybe I picked up the wrong one. My apologies then. Let's get to the next question.
Comes in from Brett Ramsey in Melbourne, Australia. He says, I have many hard disk drives and solid-state drives with hundreds of terabytes of files, mostly Final Cut Pro libraries. Does anybody have a good way of dealing with such a large amount of files? And what naming conventions or software do you use to help find archive material?
Big question. Chris Fenwick, start us off.
So, Brett, there's a couple things I want to point out to you. First of all, in terms of scanning, what you want is a piece of software that can scan all your hard drives and make it all searchable. And I use a thing called Disk Catalog Maker. I have something like 400 drives, 300, 400 drives scanned into it. And it's very quick, and it allows you to just search for a name. In terms of like the actual naming convention, there's a million ways to do that, and you just got to pick a system that works for you and stick with it. The other thing that you may want to look into is there's a piece of software called Final Cut Library Manager, of all things. It's made by a company called Arctic Whiteness. Who knows what that means? This is a super interesting app. I don't actually use it just because I was so heavily entrenched in a workflow. Our whole office was in a workflow that was really working for us. I didn't want to add another wrench into the mechanism. But if you're getting started, I would highly recommend looking at this. One of the things that it has the ability to do is to look at your libraries and like pitch unneeded files and stuff like render files that can be recreated, and you can trim things down. Normally, I don't like software that does that kind of automated stuff for you, but I played with this enough that I felt pretty good about it. But again, I don't actually use it.
I'm actually in exactly the same place. Disk Catalog Maker I've been using for 30 years. And I pulled in the Arctic Whiteness thing. I think the development team is really solid, and I would exactly mirror what Chris said. Give it a shot if you want something more complex. Alex, what are you doing?
Yeah, same software. To archive these. It does become important to think about your naming conventions. The one that I use when I'm in a production tend to be the ILM naming conventions, which is typically that you have the most general things. So you'll have the client, generally the project underscore, the asset, the version, and that's the most rough version of that. And then you subdivide it. Now, I don't usually use full names. I do it when I work with external teams. When I do it internally, I make everything four characters, typically, sometimes 3, but 3 or 4 characters. And the reason I do that is so they all line up. I like the spaces to all line up when I look at them. So when they're in there, and it just means that they all kind of sit there. You do have to shorten them because sometimes I might have a lot of these. So I can hit 100 characters in there that tell you a whole paragraph about what that is, without in something that once you get used to the codes, it makes a lot more sense there. Adhering to that and then adhering to a folder structure really makes life a lot easier. So when you have a lot of times, what I'll do is I have actually shortcuts that just build the folder structure. So I click on it and I go I will type it in. It'll just build that out inside of that section, or I'll copy and paste it. I have like a template folder structure for a project that I have sitting in a folder, and I just grab that folder and copy it into that's just empty folders, but they're the organization that I want. That way I don't have to type them all again and have typos and everything else. If you do that, if you kind of build a structure that allows you to do that, you're going to find that it's a lot easier for you to get back to them. And then giving those names is really important, because then when you use the CD, what's the name of the software again?
Arctic Whiteness.
Arctic Whiteness.
When you use that, at one point we had 2,000 drives.
Oh, Disk Catalog Maker, sorry.
Disk Catalog Maker. We had 2,000 drives with thousands of events, and I could find you something in 15 minutes. Like, we just go, because we just type that in, because it's not saving all that, it's just saving the directory. So you just type in the code for that project, and it would immediately pop up. It'll tell you it's in drive 153 or whatever, and you go grab it and pull it out. It was amazing, and it really works well. But you have to do both: good naming conventions, and then a catalog creator.
Yeah, and I'd like to also add, don't name your drives after, like the Seven Dwarfs or, various Star Wars characters. I mean, that's stupid. It's just it's cute. It's just dumb. Just give it a number. The number will tell you how old it is. And the other thing that we actually do is we use a 6-character date, year, month, date. So today would be 24/01/18, is it? What is it? At the beginning of every job folder. And then that way everything, lays out chronological, because that just makes more sense. Oh, it's the old one. It's the most current one. And then one last little trick. Somebody noticed this when we were doing an edit over Zoom. I use the favorites thing on the left side of the Finder window. That's my to-do list for the day. I drag whatever projects I need to work on in the order of priority, and I just go through them, and then I throw those out. I know it has nothing to do with your actual question, but I just wanted to talk a little more. Sorry.
Chris and I work very much the same way. That initial date string, 24/01/18 today, I live and die by that. And it's exactly for the reason he said. I always know what are the things that have been done before other things, because that date precedes everything. But everybody is unique, and it got to work for you. Alex, do you have a final thought before we move on?
Yeah, just a quick note also. We are streaming to other channels today, just letting people know. So we are streaming to the Alex Lindsay channel. We're also streaming to the Pixel Core channel. So if you're watching on those channels, note that if you really want to do this, you want to go to officehours.global. So go to YouTube/officehours global. In Office Hours Global there, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also go to officehours.global and sign up for an email and get a bunch of what's actually happening. If you have questions and you're in there, you can actually this is a QR code. You can use that QR code, or you can use Office Hours Ask Office Hours Global .global, askofficehours.global. You can use that QR code or that URL to ask your own questions from those channels. We're not going to broadcast to these channels all the time. So if you are watching this and going, well, this is really good. If you don't think it's very good, then you can just keep watching it on this channel, because it won't happen very often. If you watch it and go, this is really good, you should go and subscribe at Office Hours, the Office Hours Global channel on YouTube.
There you go. Next question.
And I might point out that our previous question, I forgot to mention, did come in via that QR code from Brett Ramsey. So thanks for using the QR code there, Brett. Next question comes in from Douglas Carmichael. He says, for those that can't afford the higher-end mics, would the Logitech Blue Sona be a solid entry-level mic that passes the Office Hours 2.0 standards?
Let's start with Harshid. Harshid Trivedi.
I think there's far cheaper microphones you could buy, like a SM58 or this SE Electronics V7 microphone, which is $100 compared to $289 to $300 for the Blue Sona. And you also got the MV7 at $250, so far too many other microphones in a better place and choice. Overpriced for the namesake for Logitech Blue Sona. Sorry.
Mitchell.
I agree 100% with Harshid on that. It's there to get your attention. It looks modern. It looks cool. It's got all these interesting specs, but a lot of the stuff is questionable unless you've had hands-on experience. I have not. I don't know anybody else here that's had that. I'm not willing to test $350 just to find out if it works.
Alex.
I think it makes sense if you're trying to be a shiny YouTuber with a shiny background, and everything's kind of very shiny. So I think that they built something that's really designed for those types of YouTubers with the purple highlights all over, and they're built out there. So I think that from a form factor, it looks very pretty. It's not round; it's square. It gives it a little bit of it's got a nice little holder for it. But I agree with everybody else that this is probably not the one I would buy. I think that at $350, it's overpriced for a mic that you would use for office hours. Now I say this speaking into a $650 mic, but I was using a Stellar yesterday, which was $200, which I think will probably sound at least as good as the Blue Sona in most of those cases. Another one that we tested that was under $100 yesterday was the Pro ARC414. This is a little one that John Wallace had suggested, and we tested this right at the end. And it comes in a nice little kit, and it's $79. I think there's actually a little deal on it. So it's a pretty solid microphone for well under $100. I think we found this one to be in the test yesterday, and I've been testing it at home. I'm probably going to keep this one around. It's pretty solid mic.
Courtney.
Yeah, that's exactly. I was so impressed by the demo that we did yesterday. If you missed it, go back to officehoursglobal.com and listen to that shootout in our second hour between the microphones that Alex did. I was most impressed. It's here in my Amazon wish list, and it's got a coupon so that you can take $16 off. So it's a little less than $70 now, so it's $64, something like that. Includes the pop filter and a shock mount. So no mic stand, but pop filter and shock mount, and it's XLR only. And I thought it sounded great for $79.
There you go. Mitchell, you had a final word?
Yeah, on the Sona, which is about $350. It is a dynamic mic, by the way. It's not a condenser. It looks like it might be a condenser at the price point and also because of what it looks like. But remember, it's a dynamic microphone.
There you go. Next question, please.
Coming in from Zach Stahlsmith in Chautauqua, New York. I teach a videography program at high school, and we have 50 Mac Studios available to us equipped with Final Cut and Logic. Is teaching with these tools instead of iMovie and GarageBand to beginners considered a best practice?
Jeffrey Powers, what do you think?
I think that what you need to do is you need to show them all. And don't forget iMovie, don't forget GarageBand, because you have those Mac Studios there in the classroom, but then when the kids go out and they got their own Mac Studios, they might not have Final Cut, they might not have Logic, they might not be able to afford those. They might be using through iMovie and GarageBand. So make sure that that you cover the whole basis, and then give them the advanced flavor and show what they can do from there, and see where their projects go from there.
Alex?
As a father of kids that are in high school right now, don't bother with GarageBand and iMovie. Like they're not very expensive as a student. They're really inexpensive to buy. And if they're going to be serious about it in the future, it doesn't cross over nearly as well as it should. So jumping from GarageBand to Logic, there's a lot of like, oh, what happened here? Same thing with iMovie, going from iMovie to Final Cut. So there's a lip there that I would just avoid. And both Logic and Final Cut are easy enough to learn, especially if you have access to studios and you're trying to teach them those. Don't make them do more than one. Just let them learn those two. I think that you're much better off letting, I would just ignore those other two right now. I mean, I think that if they're free and they come with the thing and they can go back and learn them if they want, they'll be just simpler. But I just think that what'll happen is that the tool that you use often limits what you do. And so what happens is if you have a limited tool, you do limited things. And if they have access to Final Cut and Logic, I would have them spend all their time in Final Cut and Logic and just get good at that, because they're really powerful tools. And it's an amazing opportunity for them to have Mac Studios in their high school. Take full advantage of that and make sure that you're pushing them. There's no reason why they can't do professional level work immediately out of high school. Kids learn as fast, generally faster than most adults. So the key is just trying to give them all the professionals. When I teach kids that are 12 years old how to do photogrammetry or modeling, I don't pull any punches. I just show them the professional tools to do that, and they just take up. There's so many deals for education that a lot of times they can just buy them. I mean, I think, like, for instance, Cinema 4D is like $10 a year, or maybe $10 only for students. So it's really, a lot of these things are very affordable.
Chris Fenwick.
Zach, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I did a count once. I think I've had to use 13 different edit systems throughout my career. I think learning how to jump between systems is a really good skill, because you're going to have to do it. The actuals, if you're teaching how to edit, the software doesn't matter at all. You can teach them on anything because they're going to have to learn something else anyway. The real thing is, does this shot cut against this shot? Does this sound better like this or like that? The actual software you're going to use, it's going to change many times throughout your career. Learning how to not be afraid when you're presented with, you have to use a new tool. I say this as somebody who absolutely doesn't want to learn Resolve. Shut up, Alex. Mute your mic, please. It's an important skill to have.
It is. The only thing I'll say is that it's a limited amount of time that they have access to it in school. They should have more time, in my opinion, but that's a whole nother story. But it's a limited amount of time that they have access to these things, and so you want to just get them. I would say that you want to get them on a set of tools and have them get as good as they possibly can with those tools in the limited amount of time they have in high school. If you get someone as a freshman, they could be a professional level editor and sound designer and cinematographer by the time they left high school. Like, it's totally possible. It's just a function of, but I wouldn't spend too much time having them retrain just because you want to get them to the art as fast as they can. And those two tools will take them there.
I will just have one more note, and that is there is an education bundle famously that gives you Final Cut and Logic and I think 3 other tools, and it's only $199. For the students who are going farther, that is a great plus. The other thing is that in the past, people were stopped because they didn't have enough hardware. Both of the Apple tools, Final Cut and Logic, just scream on even reasonably powered laptops. You don't need to throw a lot of hardware money at it to get good results. So those might factor in or not. But Zach, congratulations and thank you for teaching the next generation all these valuable skills. We appreciate that. Let's get to the next question.
Next one comes in from Livermore, California, and Scott Tupper. He asked, Shift Cam, better be careful with that, maker of phone lenses, announced a probe lens at CES. Anyone experience using one of these?
Ooh, probe lenses are so much fun. Guy Cochran, take us into it.
Yeah, these are really specialty lenses, and unless you're using them a lot, like Chris Ritchie, he bought the Laowa probe lens, and he showed it to us in After Hours, and he does a lot of pipes, and so he showed us going through a pipe, and it was really cool. But here at my local rental house, I could rent that $1,500 probe lens. So here's the Venus at B&H for $2,299, but I could rent it for $20 to $35 a day. So this is a thing where, it's cool. I'm glad to see ShiftCam coming out with this. And if you're going to be using it a lot, you can get some really cool shots with the iPhone 15, especially with the newer glass. It's a great idea. It's just, is it something that you'll use all the time, or better off as a rental on a full frame camera? So that's my thoughts on those.
Jeffrey Powers.
Yeah, when I did do the interview with them, we did talk, and I didn't think that they announced that at CES because we did talk about it in the NDA space. Yeah, it's not out yet. So they didn't. I don't think they had any samples. Not that they showed me at CES, but it looked pretty cool. The other thing that they announced was that case, and that the case to hold all your lenses and all your shift cams and everything like that was a pretty sweet little case there. So, but we'll see what happens when it does come out, how well it works.
And Alex Lindsay.
I signed up. I don't know how much they're going to charge for it. Jeffrey, they didn't tell you. Did they have any idea?
No. Everything was in prototype mode, and that's probably all I can say about that.
Yeah, I can't wait to have one. I have to say that I love creative shots, and I love the stuff that I've seen there. I haven't been able to justify yet having a project to buy the larger one, but I'm very close because I think that for me, I rent a lot of lenses, so I definitely rent lenses that I don't think I'm going to use. But there's also, with an experimental lens, the reason I tend to buy them is specifically because I need to experiment with them, and I don't want to feel like I'm getting charged $200 a week to fiddle it with it, because then I'm like, well, I could have just bought it with a couple weeks of work, and I think that the problem is I have to get my head around it. I don't think very many people, unless they've used it a lot, are going to be able to rent the lens and be able to get good product out of it. There's a lot to it to make it work. You want to look at a lot of the videos that are there, and I think that you just need a lot of time to experiment with it. And so as a result, I've been close to getting them for my regular camera. I'm definitely going to get it for my phone.
Courtney.
Yeah, I haven't. I looked at it. I don't know what the price is yet, and I'm with Guy. I think specialized photography with this is a look at the lens, and it has where it mates to your phone. It's just this little circle that goes into the lens area of the phone, and so you're going to have some kind of small rig or some type of device that's going to hang onto this thing. Otherwise, you're going to be hand holding it against the surface of your iPhone, which is kind of bizarre. And so the thing that you'd use it for is really specialized macro photography, which you don't do that often. And if you've got a project that you need that kind of photography, I think renting one that goes onto a DSLR would probably be a better thing to do. It is waterproof, supposedly, so if you want to shoot the fish in your aquarium up close, you can do that without having to dip your iPhone into the water, as long as they're within about 7 or 8 inches of the surface. So you could use it for that.
Let's go to the next question.
Next one comes in from Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas. He says, recording yesterday's Flow 8 and 2 Mac Mini question. The Flow 8 is running digital sound from the M2, trying to run digital sound out from the M1 to the Flow 8. Where my headphones are? Did I mess that up too much?
Alex,
I got it.
Did you parse it?
I think that there's not any good way to do what you're trying to do without going back out to an analog pipe. So you're going to you're either going to use something like Dante to get from one computer to the other, or then you still need a piece of Dante hardware somewhere in there, or you're going to need to go analog out of that somehow and then put it back into the Flow 8. I don't think there's any way there's no digital way to go into the Flow 8 from two different computers.
And next question.
Next one comes in from our own Guy Cochran right here in Seattle, USA. Is Alex back on the Neumann? Yes.
And for unimaginable reasons, Mitchell raised his hand to answer this.
I don't know. I guess I'm looking at it. It looks like a Neumann to me. The only difference between that and the Stellar is I like the Stellar in black. So I don't know if there's a way to make that Neumann turn black with chrome accents.
They have a couple of black mics, but Alex, what do you think? What is your?
We were testing it yesterday, and I thought, it sounds pretty full, and I thought I'd give it a shot for a little while, and play with it. I'll look at a couple shows later and make a decision about it. But I felt like it felt pretty warm. It's in a new environment, so I'm using it in a slightly different way than I had before when we tested it previously. Still like the Stellar a lot. I just figured I'd give this one another shot. So,
I'm sorry, I wasn't at your test yesterday. I'm sorry, I missed it.
Yeah.
But this mic doesn't quite have the proximity bassiness that the Stellar does.
It can. I'm just further away from it. Like if I get really close, I can really, set that up. So it just
it does,
so
but not as well.
And so the it's an interesting experiment. So we'll keep on playing with it.
Yeah, it was actually fun listening to them, and I was lucky enough. I threw my headphones on, and to me, the difference was in the upper mid-range. That Neumann was just smoother. I think I used the term buttery, and it's not that any of them were bad-sounding mics. Your voice will come across on all of them, but these little subtleties really become apparent in a shootout like that. So if you're interested in microphones, do go back and watch yesterday's show. It's a really interesting comparison. Let's do one more question.
All right, our last one in for this hour comes in from Hasmik Gaijar in Cape Town, South Africa. He says, for a medical event next week, I've installed Zoom ISO 2.1.2. Previous rev was used in June 2023 when recording access was needed. What changes, if any, do I need to be aware of?
And Alex?
I don't think there's any major changes you need to worry about with Zoom ISO. I'm using 2.1.2 right now for most of the shows that I work on with it, and it pretty much is the same. I think that from what happened back there, embedding audio into the video signal was, I think, something that is new in this newer version, but I don't use that, so it hasn't been a big deal. So I still am sending out ISOs of each video, and then using the Zoom ISO to Dante to get out of the to bring those individual feeds back out. So if you're doing it that way, you shouldn't have to make any other adjustment.
Couple of announcements here as we make our transition into the top of the hour. The next show workshop is Wednesday, the 7th of February. And that's really, if you want to get into the office hours system, that's a great way to start. It's right after our new panelist orientation, which takes place on the same day. Isadora's Lab this week is going to be very special. An incredible opportunity always, but this one's going to be extra special because the Troikatronics founder and Isadora creator Mark Coniglio is going to be here right 1 hour after this. So if you're interested in any way, shape, and form on how Isadora operates, today is your day. Stop by and definitely do that. Friday, January 19th, tomorrow, Understanding Blackmagic Cloud. We're going to be looking at Blackmagic Cloud soon, and I understand we're going to be using some of it in the show as we go along. So we'll talk about the steps required to learn that system. That is all happening, and we've got more things every week. Make sure that you're inside the system, and make sure you sign up for the office hours emails if you're in there. That's really the kind of the heart of all the information. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the second hour, and we're really excited to have a good friend of mine, John Ross, here on the show. John Ross has been remixing for music, TV, and film for over 30 years and has worked on over 150 films. His movie credits, a handful of them: Austin Powers, American Hustle, Burned, Patriots Day, and also music credits like Kanye West, Brandi Carlile in the Canyon Haze Live, and most recently, Taylor Swift's Eras Tour and Beyoncé's Renaissance film. So this is just a little sample of what John has worked on. John, it's so great to have you here on the show.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
And just to give you a sense, for everyone to give you a sense of what where John's sitting. We're seeing John sitting here on the reverse shot or semi-reverse shot of that is this large mixing stage. So this is this is what John works in on a day-to-day basis. And I just wanted to show it to folks because they might have some questions about how it works. But just to give you a sense of what that actually looks like there. And I've spent quite a few days down there. It's an amazing space. John, can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in this business?
Well, like a lot of folks in our business, in the sort of the creative technical community, I came out of music. Music was my fascination, and technology. I was the kid who basically always took apart the radio that my mother had just bought, and sometimes put it back together correctly. And so that fascination. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, originally. Led me into doing live sound in South Africa. And then I was offered a job to work for Diana Ross when I was 23 years old. Came out to the United States, was a front of house sound mixer, which was great because she was Beyoncé back in those days. And it was a fantastic thing for a young 23-year-old to do. It was fun doing that sort of stuff. And then basically transitioned into MIDI was sort of starting to become a real thing, sort of computer-based audio. Back in those days. So we opened up a tiny little recording studio, and that then we did Paul Abdul's Straight Up and various other pieces like that in this tiny little studio. And then we bought a Fairlight Series 3, which is an Australian early CMI device. And then that I had this fascination about doing post-production, even though I knew nothing about it, using some of these computer devices. So we went to a trade show and sort of advertised our wares, even though we didn't really know anything about it. And some fortunate/unfortunate person sort of booked us to do the stuff. And so we learned how to do it pretty much based upon those experiences. And that led to sort of, the naivety of not knowing how it's traditionally done is sometimes useful.
Yeah,
because
we love to say the saying, we don't do these things because they're easy. We do them because we thought they'd be easy.
Exactly. And then we went into the post-production world, and then we basically took that little facility, built a new facility based around some of the newer technologies. So we were the first to really use, doing post-production for motion pictures using infrastructure that classically would have come from, let's say, newspaper publishing and things of that nature, where you had a centralized server, lots of people working on a project at the same time, because at the time, everything was pretty manual. And then we had a 4 systems ATM switch, for example, and going down to new bus cards in Macintoshes. Sold that company in '99. We did a bunch of shows, some of which you mentioned in the introduction, and then retired for a few years and decided to build this. This is actually in my home, and we sort
the best office ever, because it's an amazing home that sits right next to that studio, and you do, and in addition to mixing, you do have a lot of events there, right?
Yeah, we because it's a unique combination of an IMAX room, an Atmos room, and good laser projection, all that kind of good. Basically, a first class motion picture theater. But it's attached to a home. So we do a lot of Academy events from let's say October to January when people are bringing in Academy members for evaluating films. We'll do a lot of them. In fact, we just finished the season now because the nominations have just gone in. We legally have to finish. So we've had, for the most part, almost every major movie star that you can imagine. It's actually harder to figure out who hasn't. It's easier to figure out who hasn't been here than who has. Just because we do these events, and they're about 100-person events, and we show the stuff, and then we wine and dine people afterwards. So that's sort of a little side gig, which is fun.
Now, a lot of the work that you do right now is working in some version of surround, right? I mean, that's a big piece of your business.
Yes, almost all of it. Almost all of it.
And what are the key factors? So one of the big things people ask is, I'll say, well, you can't mix something in a near field. you need a big mixing stage, and that they always say, I don't understand why you can't just do it in a small theater. Can you explain a little bit about why you need such a large cavernous volume that you have there?
Sure, and I'll give. Well, if you're mixing for motion picture, all right, you're obviously playing back in theatrical spaces. The dynamic range available in this space is way different from what you would find in a near field environment. So I can always tell when things were mixed in a near field environment if I bring it in here, because the dialogue will be choppy. The relationship to music and sound effects will be very different. And so when we do motion pictures, we do near field versions just because of the how sound behaves in larger spaces and how you perceive it in larger spaces is very different. So, and I'm sure people have sort of watched have watched films on television where the dialogue is extremely low and the sound effects are really loud. That's because that was a motion picture mix. In theater, you have that dynamic range, so you hear it all. On television or near field, you don't. You have a very, very limited dynamic range. So that's why we limit the dynamic range for smaller environments and expand it for larger environments. So you need to be able to have a larger environment in order to perceive that.
Now, when you're mixing for surround, how do you approach it? Like, where are you putting things, and where, how do you think about that kind of creation process?
Well, here's sort of the first of all, there are no rules. And if anybody tells you there's rules, then that's the first rule to break. But there are things that make sense. For example, if I'm looking at you and you're talking to me and your voice doesn't come from where your face is, that's a problem, right? There you have suspended disbelief, and those belief systems are broken when things happen. So when for example 5.1 or even Dolby Surround first occurred, people were doing things just because they could. You'll have dialogue behind you and all that kind of good stuff. And what it does is it distracts the audience. So our goal is to basically create a believable sound palette that if you were Joe Public and you just experience life, you're used to hearing things in a certain way. What this surround can do is offer you things that you naturally would naturally hear in nature. But doesn't necessarily break that suspended disbelief unless you're going to do something like Roma, for example, where they broke every single rule and it actually worked. So I have a term which I say, like, you never want to see the hand of the puppeteer. You never want to break that illusion. So our purpose is to walk a fine line between what might be believable that we can just accept as being what we understand about life. And then also just enhancing that experience using everything in your surrounds, all the capabilities that you have.
Well, and in some ways, aren't you, this is something I've kind of learned in discussions with you, of really building a space inside of your mind. Like, so as you touch things, as you say, oh, there's something over here, my mind kind of expands out to feeling that space. I know that I've seen some examples at your house where you don't hear any vocals for quite some time. All you hear are all these surround noises. But when when that vocal hits, it feels more present than anything I've ever heard. Because but all that before that was required, right?
Right. We understand the differences. When something's coming at us all the time, we get used to it. And first of all, there's two sort of rules to that. So right now, there's a lot of mixing being done without picture. The Atmos mixing music, for example. When you don't have a visual component tied to it, you have a lot more latitude. You can do things that sort of occupy that physical space that are kind of interesting. But once you add a visual component to it, you somewhat, attach to that image, and you have to adhere to it. A case in like mixing a movie, for example, as opposed to mixing music or records, the concept of stereo is actually very different. Our main speaker is actually the center speaker, because that's where most of the action occurs on screen. And in music, often you'll get things that are done by music folks, and they rarely use the center speaker. Different philosophy.
And which for me is really problematic. I with a lot of the mixes that came out as Apple released all the spatial music and everything else, you could tell oftentimes whether the person mixing it came from cinema or whether they came from music, because the music would be, and I found that it was a little distracting because it would have sometimes some phase issues and sometimes some other issues that didn't sound exactly right. Because that vocal wasn't coming down that center speaker.
Yeah, for sure. But there's also I had Jackson Brown here. I was just playing him some stuff, and I played him What's Going On, Marvin Gaye. And there's a beautiful Atmos mix of it that just moves around the room. And I'm sure maybe anybody who's seen an Atmos demo more than likely has experienced it, but in a true Atmos, not on Apple headphones. His comment was, "Wow, that's amazing, but do you really want to unravel the casserole?" There's taste is a big thing. In all of these things, we really, really got to be cognizant of the fact that really should we be doing stuff just because we can? And I think good mixers are one that really utilize that space in such a way that it never takes you out of the moment, keeps you engaged, and never breaks that aesthetic that just brushes by us and we just accept to be real, normal. And you can go pretty far without breaking it if you're careful, if you're smart.
And we've got a couple questions from our panelists here. Bill?
First and foremost, thank you for being here. It's such a privilege to be able to talk to you about this. I've noticed on a lot of movie credits, that credit that I saw on your bio a lot, re-recording mixer. And some people may be confused about what exactly is a re-recording mixer. Can you help our audience understand that?
Re-recording mixers, when they don't get it right the first time, I come and fix it. No. There are two recording processes that occur in film, right? The production recorder is the guy who records the dialogue, who's literally there with the action with the boom mic. What happens is that's an important part of the soundtrack, but not the most important part of the soundtrack. So what happens is there's so many other processes that happens to that audio, and there's ADR added, which is automatic dialogue replacement. There's backgrounds, there's sound effects, there's Foley, there's all these various layers. There's music, there's score that's broken out into source, and various flavors of music that is in there. So by the time it gets to us, we're sitting in this theater, and we have well over 1,000 channels of audio that we're mixing with. The production guy often has 8. So he is the recordist. Our task is basically re-recording his stuff, plus adding all the other elements that basically make it a motion picture. Hence that name. It's just an historical name. But ironically, when we did the Taylor Swift movie, they were very concerned that it might have been perceived as being fixing it in post. So if you look at the credits on the Eras tour, it'll actually say theatrical mix, which is actually not the normal way of describing this job title, but they decided to do it just to make sure that there was no misunderstanding.
I have one more simple little thing, and I'm just interested where, when you're mixing something like this, does, for you, realism stop and kind of hyper-realism begin? We've all seen movies where everything explodes huge and everything is bigger than life. Do you think about that change, that delta between real and hyper-real for your audiences?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's, you know, a lot of what we do is technical. A lot of what we do is creative, and a lot of what we do is psychology. So obviously we have to deal with the technical aspects of making motion pictures, right? But there's an aesthetic to what you're doing, and a good re-recording mixer will understand that and work with the director. You know, for example, I can totally change how a conversation might feel, right? If there's two people at a restaurant and there's background music playing and there's a hubbub of people going on and they're having a conversation about, let's say, their child, right? If I pull down the background or slightly reverb out those voices behind their conversation and pull down or push through reverb the background music that's playing over the speaker system in the restaurant, that conversation becomes far more serious. It becomes far more intimate. And so now as an audience, you start paying attention to that. If I just blow through it or just keep them as part of the thing, that conversation becomes less serious. So there are things there are little subtle cues like that in visual effects, it's very obvious what's going on. In audio, it's way more subtle. So you can build up things, and we've all seen it, and we just accept it for being real. You know, a gunshot goes off and the sound is muted afterwards, and there's just a 7K squeal. That's obviously the perception of the person who fired the shot or whomever, just because their ears have now collapsed. Obviously, it's never shot that way. It's built totally in sound. But you can tell a whole different layer to a story using sound and how you mix it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
John, thank you for letting me say hi. I'm a child of the 70s. I grew up with that music, and I was also a disc jockey back in those days. I was also got out of the radio business in 1992 when the music companies started forcing those very, very harsh mixes on us that had about 3 dB. So I'm suggesting maybe there's another job for you. You could be the remixer, the guy that takes all those songs that have been squashed and mix them the way they're supposed to be done.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating thing. You know, we got digital because we had more headroom, and all we did was push it all up to the bottom, the top of the headroom, and just use 3 dB and it's just everybody's trying to be louder than everybody else. And the sad thing is that's also kind of happening in motion pictures now. We have a reference level. There is a standard, right? And that standard is in a theatrical environment, 0, which is 0.775 millivolts, 0 VU, with a pink noise reference at -20 should yield you 85 dB C-weighted slow response. And so that gives you effectively 20 dB of headroom above 0, which is pretty good. I mean, that's loud. You can get really, really loud in that space. Theaters should be set up that way. But what's happening is because people have abused the volume in theaters, just directors often, the theaters now turn it down because they don't want the liability aspect of it. So what happens is now the mixers are mixing hotter and hotter, and we're starting to wander into that same space that records did or music did, where some films, I cannot play them at 85 reference dB, Oppenheimer being a perfect example thereof. And there are worse ones, trust me, where if I played it at 85 dB, I could not be in this room. So a lot of that thinking has sort of is starting to creep into the motion picture business now, which is a problem. Music's, back in the day, we had less headroom, so we were smarter about it. Now that you have this, there are literally plugins that go, this one makes it louder than that one, and they're trading on the fact that they can use those 3 dB to optimum horsepower.
Well, and talk about loudness a little bit, because there's a lot. You talked about theatrical, but there's a lot of different standards, right? As we go into the streaming world, it seems like everybody has a slightly different opinion about what loudness means or what it should be.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a new can of worms that has popped up, because with all the best of intentions, the whole LUF system was developed, which was basically about average energy. in the old days on broadcast, you would have the standard was dialogue could never exceed, I think it was +6 and never drop below -10. And the material itself could never go beyond +12. Now you have, a number that you have to hit for the various broadcasters. But it is based upon an average energy. So if you're doing Everybody Loves Raymond, you can actually get pretty loud dynamic range because it's vocal, silence, vocal, silence, vocal, silence. If you're doing something like the Justin Timberlake thing that I did for Netflix, where they were using that same number for a delivery mechanism, the average energy of that that track is way more than Everybody Loves Raymond. So for me to hit that same number, I have to turn it down. In their case, it was like 14 dB, which is a lot. And so the perception is it's just very soft.
John, how do you anticipate what the broadcasters are going to do on top of what's done in the final mix?
Well, they tell you. They have a very specific, note for you to hit. Typically, some of the broadcasters now, they used to actually do a lot of like post compression and everything. Now they actually do less, which is a good thing, because the delivery mechanisms are a little bit different. But we still have the problem with the perception of loudness. That format that was created doesn't take into account music. Although some of the Netflix and Apple, for example, they're now starting to sort of rethink any music orientated stuff, how we need to deal with that. It's not a set and forget thing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
So, John, I'm looking at your house there and looking at my house, I realize I've made some poor life choices, and you've made much, much better life choices. I'm old. I'm a lost cause. Do you have any business advice, like just points of clarity that younger people should be thinking about? Because it's clear you understand the technology that you deal with, but you've also made some good business choices. What's your secret?
I follow a fascination. And I think, if you're fascinated with something, the same thing that drove you to pull your mother's radio apart, that's just a fascination. And I think anybody who's fascinated about anything will be good at it. There's no school that can teach you fascination. And so we've been lucky enough that those fascinations have been useful for us as we go. We've also, taken chances. We sort of financed our first business on credit cards and whatever you need to do to get going. And so business-wise, gosh, it's a crapshoot. There's so you got to pull all the levers and see what happens. And sometimes you pull the wrong lever and sometimes you don't. But I think, the goal is to basically, if you have an idea, just go with it and live it.
Quick follow-up. Looking back over your career, what do you think the worst business mistake you made was? Obviously, you've recovered quite well.
Business mistake, gosh. I've never thought about that before.
How about dumbest piece of gear you bought? Like, oh, why did I buy that thing?
Oh, I've done that many times. There's a bad habit of mine, which is I always sort of buy things that are untested. So, for example, this room here, when we first bought it online, there was not one piece of gear that actually had been used for this function. So, as a result, the first 6 months were traumatic. But once we figured it out, because now you had the advantage that the manufacturers who were all new in this particular game were very focused on getting it right. So you had their attention. And so they sat with us. And as a result, we ended up with being a better product than if we just went with the normal line items that one would do to put this together. But it took a few years of my life getting it there.
Now, and you moved away from, like, we see this mixer. This is the last console. This isn't your current console, but this is got a lot of sliders there. Now, for a while, you were not using physical interfaces, right? You had kind of moved to a more virtual experience.
No, I mean, many years ago.
Yeah,
I developed a system because at the time the concept of mixing in the box, right? There's two different philosophies. There's mixing in the box, which is inside of any workstation, Pro Tools being the biggest one. was very appealing, but there was no real front end to it. The only front end that existed was a Huey, which was a tiny little Mackie device, the 8-fader box running through MIDI. And so I'm still a believer, and I am a believer in a physical tactile thing for faders specifically. A lot of mixers now do what I call mouse mixing. They mix, and there's just no way you can get a performance out of that. You've got to feel it. And if you're rolling through, it's a feel thing. Mixing is a feel thing. It's not a numbers game. Although a lot of younger mixers now, they sit and they tapping and they put in this line up or half a dB, this one, whatever. I just think it loses any life. So we developed a system years ago, which was what I call the glass console. I'm a pilot, so there's a transition between what they call gas gauges in airplanes and then to glass cockpits. And so what this was is basically a large tactile touchscreen when they first came out, which were very expensive and very low resolution, combined with 32 physical faders that could speak to Huey into Pro Tools. So that became sort of more virtualized in how you ran it. But I'm kind of back to a knob per function surface, which is what the S6 is. It is virtual in that there's no audio actually running through those knobs. It's just literally a huge mouse. But you can do that on literally on a screen if you want to. But I if you can afford it, get physical devices.
Go ahead, Courtney.
I was wondering if your setup there has been set up for the old school Hollywood 3-position mixer, or if it's just for a solitary mixer and doing effects, dialogue, and music separately. And
it's been a long time since we've done 3-man mixes. And our old one used to, but now 2-man is pretty much the standard. In some cases, one-man mixing. In New York, for example, it's all 1-man mixing.
Really? Yeah.
But for the most part, when we do motion pictures, it's 2-man mixing.
And I had one other question. And now that you're doing a lot of mixing for Atmos or surround environmental type stuff, especially for theatrical, do you ever mix dialogue anywhere other than center, left, right? If you throw something into the surrounds, I know it always distracts me in the theater when I'm watching and I hear some dialogue coming from over my shoulder somewhere. It makes me turn around and see if it's somebody behind me or if it's somebody in the surround mix. But do you always keep dialogue in the center channel, or maybe left center, right center?
Yes. But once again, these things can change. You can walk somebody. You can walk somebody, let's say, for example, over your left shoulder, back into the surround. But if somebody starts talking from the back of the room, it is distracting, just like you said. Right. And also, by the way, unpredictable in theaters, because often the surrounds are interesting.
Maladjusted, you mean?
Yeah. So you might have a different problem.
Yes.
But for the most part, it's in the center, but it moves from left to right, or you diverge it a little bit to sort of get some fill. If I'm doing a music thing, for example, the Taylor or the Beyoncé thing, that they, for the most part, are somewhat hard center, but it's flattened out a little bit. So most of the energy comes from the center, but it's also occupying left and right fields. And sometimes you actually pull them a little bit into the room, so it's left, right, and the first row of speakers that happen to be in an Atmos space, just to sort of create depth into that mix, because now we can create depth, because we have speakers that represent that physical space. In music you can get away with a lot more, but there are many cases, like I think Roma is actually a brilliant mix. I don't know if you ever heard that in a true Atmos theater, but it's if you're in front of me and the camera's pointing at you, my voice is in the bottom, in the surrounds, and then as the camera flips, it goes the other way. And it's very distracting at first, but you kind of get into it over a period of time. So that was very brave and a lot of work to do. So I would say 99% the way you just mentioned.
Let's go ahead, and we got a lot of questions stacking up. Let's go ahead and jump into the first question from the audience.
All right, coming in from Andy Kokendorfer in Viera, Florida. He says, what is the minimum configuration to get started with in surround mixing?
Talent. Well, there's different forms of surround, right? There's 5171, Atmos, IMAX, and then 2 formats within IMAX. 5.1 mixing would be the most basic version of it. The you would need to have a room that is fairly dead. I would not get a lot of energy from the room itself. You would need, and one thing that's actually when you're starting out doing it, often people will misplace where the speakers are versus the screen. It's important to have an aspect ratio that makes sense. So that's why they have speakers typically behind perforated screens. If you have them wide on either side and maybe a center speaker below the speaker, you're going to make choices that don't necessarily make sense, because when you pan things away, it's just going to feel so different from the image on the screen. But you could literally get a Pro Tools or a Nuendo or any one of these systems that could be 5.1 panning and a 5.1 rig of some sort. There's a bunch of companies, and once again, don't know what the budget is. But you could go anywhere from relatively small home 5.1 to a bunch of Genelecs, or up to Meyer sound systems. So 5.1, I guess, would be the thing at a workstation. Would be the basic answer.
Next question.
Coming in from Robert Shoji here in Los Angeles, he says, "How do you keep the dialogue intelligible and above the soundtrack, and keep the director happy?" In parentheses.
Depends on the director. No, fortunately, there's a lot of very good tools right now that can clean up dialogue. So you're, at the end of the day, the goal should be that these are not pantomimes. You really have to understand the dialogue. At least that's my philosophy. Some people have a slightly different philosophy, but I anchor. The first thing that sets the anchor for that scene is the dialogue. So it lives at a place where it's comfortable. You can hear it. It doesn't hurt. It rolls by. You can hear all those details. Then the sound effects and all the other backgrounds and music, whatever, is built around that. So the worst thing that you can do in a lot of sort of rookie mixes when they start out, they get into an action sequence where the emphasis is on the car engines or the big score or whatever, and then they try and push the dialogue over that, and then so you get these weird bumps of energy, and so the goal is always keep the dialogue where it needs to be, and if you need to bring sound effects down to accommodate for it, or make an EQ hole or whatever you need to do to make that safe, then that's what you need to do.
Next question.
This one comes in from Hashi Trivedi in Daytona Beach, Florida. He says, "I'm fascinated. When do you use speakers or use headphones? So near field monitors versus headphones."
Never use headphones. Yeah, I mean,
what do you think? What do you think of the simulators? There's some that say they simulate different rooms. What's your opinion on that?
Would you trust a person who's very good at Microsoft flight as a flight simulator to go up in the air?
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Next question.
Next question comes in from Douglas Carmichael. He says, "With the growth of immersive audio technologies in live performance, like L'acoustics and ELISA, could you see a lot of crossover from film and TV mixing techniques into the live arena?"
Funny you should mention that. We good? We have, yes, is the answer to that question. Dolby, for example, have their Dolby Live environment. Then you have the Sphere situation, which is excellent, by the way. So the concept of immersive audio can definitely be used in live performances and is being used in live performances. The issue is often latency, because obviously the bigger the venue, the longer it takes from sound to get from point A to point B. So you have to be really careful with what you use in that environment. We've actually created an environment called Laurel Canyon Live, hence you see this title here, that basically pushes live concerts down to TV, iOS, and also theaters. We doing the three shows that went theatrically, the Beyoncé one, the Taylor one, and also for IMAX for Brandy Carlisle. It proves that people are actually quite prepared to go and experience live things in theater, and then also experience immersive stuff in live situation, as in the Dolby Live experience. So I think that'll become more prevalent as time goes by.
Next question.
Comes in from Mickey Macacor in Manila, Philippines. He says, "I've mostly been using Cinematic Rooms and Stratus 3D for the past few years, but Altiverb is making its way back into my sessions with the release of Altiverb 8. What surround and 3D verbs are you currently using in your session templates?
All of the ones you mentioned.
How do you decide which one to use on a specific thing?
Well, Cinematic Rooms is often is pretty much designed for reality. So let's say, for example, I want to put a particular scene in a physical space. I would more likely go into that space because those IRs and that space is designed to emulate reality. I mean, they all are. There are IRs in Altiverb, for example, that are from various physical locations, and you want to reproduce something like that, you would use those tools. Sometimes, like Stratus 3D, I use that for just pleasant reverbs. Let's say, for example, you just want a beautiful decay on a voice or things along those lines, or you just want to take a whole mix and basically make it dive into this lush surround reverb that sits around you. They all have their uses, and I use all three of them depending upon the use case.
Next question.
Coming in from Edmonton, Alberta, Dave Troutman asks, during the Eras movie, I loved hearing the crowd singing along. Can you address the challenge it presents in the post-mix?
That was all me, just multi-layered. I'm joking. There was, gosh, how many mics? We had I think it was maybe 25 to...
And in that case, you were really part of the record as well. Like you were paying attention to that as well, or making requests at least.
They came to me before the thing, and I spoke to the folks. I wasn't physically there. Was a gentleman that actually did that. Lots of microphones set up around the arena. Obviously you have time delay and all that sort of stuff that you have to deal with post that, and also just people getting close up to microphones and going, Taylor, we love you. We have to go and get rid of a lot of those sorts of things. And so you had to capture that because the PA is so loud that if you just capture the voices under the band and her and everything, you really have any sense of the audience. So there was a lot of microphones placed throughout the SoFi arena, and we used them a lot. In fact, in many cases, we used those microphones as the ultimate IR. I kept on saying to the folks.
And you're saying IR, your impulse response?
Impulse response. So we had the ability to sort of put her into the room using none of the tools that we mentioned earlier about reverbs. We just used the SoFi Stadium. And so that was, you had that bouncing off those walls and all that kind of good stuff. And in doing so, you also capture the audience, but there's a point where it starts becoming distracting. So that's a fine line that you walk. But what was fortunate, we had it just because it has a natural reverb to it. That was wonderful. But we also, were able to capture the audience that way.
Next question.
Comes in from Joaquin Matus in the Imperial Valley, California. He says, John, you've mixed your fair share of highly regarded concert films like Taylor Swift's Eras and Beyoncé's Renaissance film recently. With projects of this type, how do you approach creating the best immersive experience possible for the audience?
When you go to I always use the term the best seat in the best seat in the house. So our goal is to basically give that audience the best seat in the house. So when you were actually physically there, you heard a lot of stuff going behind you. And for the most part, it was things bouncing off the back walls from the actual band and things along those lines. I'll use SoFi Stadium as an example. And so we captured, that stuff is naturally captured with those audience microphones. And they are placed where those audience microphones were actually used in our physical space here. So, if that in the back left corner, there was a cluster of microphones that represented that, that's where it's played in the theater. So you're basically experience the same immersive effect as if you were physically there. So when people are yelling and they were behind the microphones or the microphones back there, they'll be yelling behind you.
Next question.
From Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. He says, at what point during the production or post-production would you like to get the music score? How complete do you want it to be? Are there advantages to getting it very early in the process? And do you ever mix with sample or temp tracks?
Gosh, yes, we do often get temp tracks because it's a dynamic world. Things change, and often they might give us temp tracks because they haven't done the orchestra recording yet, things of that nature. It actually really doesn't make that much difference because there's a layer between typically the composer and the production mixer and the scoring mixer and us, and that's typically a music editor. That person will sit there and basically build the show in sync with whatever is required. Maybe we need to shorten the cue, lengthen the cue, all that kind of good stuff. That happens before us, so that can actually walk in a day in advance. But if there is sort of complex things, I say a musical, sometimes you will want to be able to pre-dub some of that stuff. So we would want to get those tracks pretty well in advance because there's a lot of detail work that needs to be put into place just so that it's in a very organized fashion by the time we actually get to do the show.
And that's the same for live too. I mean, if you have an artist coming and you know that, for instance, they might be using a click track or they might be have some it's nice to see that well in advance of when they actually come to do the show.
Yeah, I mean, in the live thing, obviously, because that's everything that it is, we're working on it as a whole. So that has to happen. That has to get to us a long time before we've finished mixing it, because that's what we're mixing with. Whereas in a typical narrative film, the music is a portion of it, and for the most part, it's in pretty good shape because that's what the music editor has done for it. And they build it into stems, so we have the ability to get in and do sub mixes and break things out and take things out and amplify things and EQ things differently.
Next question.
Coming in from Los Angeles, and Robert Shoji says, when mixing or mastering for just 2 channels or near field, what model speakers do you use for your work?
When we do near field 5.1s, like back in the day, there's people sort of love the Genelecs as sort of that was sort of the unwritten law, like you go and set up a bunch of Genelecs. I have some JBL near field. I have another room back here, and we use JBL near fields in there. And
which JBLs do you use back there?
The 3-way, they're like the 6 series. They're the 3-way ones.
3-way 6 series ones.
There you go. I hear Jason in the background there.
Yes, my truth sayer.
Yeah. Next question.
From Harshid Trivedi in Daytona Beach, Florida. He says, are you in the process of mixing for audio description during the mixing process overall? Audio description, he explains, is used by the persons with vision loss.
Does that ever come into your pipeline?
No, not really. No. I mean, I think we provide stems as part of our delivery format, and I think there are people who do that sort of work post us for that sort of a formatting issue.
Next question.
Marty Atias in Maryland says, John, you talked about the importance of placing surround speakers in the right places when setting up a room. Can you talk about how to calibrate them?
Well, there are a few different ways of doing it. There are finite ways of doing it. Typically in a theatrical environment, let's say 5.1, for example, the speakers will be left, center, right, hopefully behind the screen in the same aspect ratio as the screen. And you should be able to get 85 dB, 85 dB, 85 dB in a normal room. The speakers that are surround left, for example, would be 82 dB, once again doing the minus 20 0 story. And then the same, so both surrounds would be 82 dB, and then when you turn them both on, that gives you 85 dB. And then the sub is a sort of an in-band measurement, and typically it works out to be about 89 dB that you will see in the sub. Rolled up at 120, I think, is the Dolby standard. So in Atmos, you have to have each speaker source has to be able to deliver you 85 dB of energy from each speaker source, with 20 dB of headroom above that. So a lot of horsepower is required for the Atmos situation. In home 5.1, it's actually 85, 85, 85 everywhere. So it's a little bit different. And IMAX, it's 85. It's the same, except the subwoofer is fed in. The subwoofer is derived from the low end energy that's actually in both your surrounds and your mains, and that's the same for the IMAX 12.0.
Next question.
From Kyle Hammond, coming in from Chicago, Illinois, he says, you mentioned events in this space, and I'm curious if you're also set up to broadcast out of that room for a networked event experience.
Yes. So we have a system. In fact, if you would like, you can download it. Anybody out there, if they choose to do it, can go to the Apple Store and download, or actually any of the stores, Android stores, download Laurel Canyon Live, and you can actually watch events that were done in this thing, and you can do it now if you wish. Just go and search for Laurel Canyon Live, and then I'm going to give you a test code if you want to actually watch a show, and it would be capital T, and then any number, any three-digit number between 001 and 999. Choose a number; it'll be unique to you, and you can watch a live show that's actually done in here. So we have full. This whole place is wired up for fiber optics, for example, and so we can pull cameras into this. We have Unreal Engine camera tracking inside this room, so we can create virtual sets. We're pushing up through AWS now into distribution for this environment, and we have color timing here. We have camera switching. We have all that kind of good stuff. And we've also developed a system that actually allows us to send sort of a tethered rack out to artists in the field, and we capture 128 microphones and control 20 cameras, which gets fed back to this room, which also gets pushed out through this distribution system.
Next question.
From Danny Grizzle in Longview, Texas. He says, George Martin first mixed everything in mono in order to get the EQ carved out properly in the mix. Are mono mixes still the starting point?
Not really. Just because his choice was mono to stereo. Our choice is mono to everything. So it doesn't really have that much relevance. Although, if you watch The Holdovers, that's just coming out right now, that mix was actually purposely done in pure mono, and it sounds beautiful.
And what would you say? I mean, a lot of people are like, "Well, I don't know what the difference is between stereo and surround." And how would you, when you talk to someone like that, what do you say as far as moving from? For me, the difference between mono and stereo is less than the difference between stereo and surround. But how would you explain? Do you ever explain that to the folks to think about it?
Well, I think we live our lives in immersive sound because sounds are happening 360 degrees around us all the time. It's just classically music or entertainment has come from a single point source or a double point source. So all we're trying to do is basically emulate that same experience that you might have in real life using the newer technologies that allow us to do that. And so there's, I think, that the enjoyment of suspended disbelief, the ability to take people to other places or theater of the mind is enhanced with the ability to sort of experience things the way that you might experience things naturally.
Next question.
From Alton Christensen, coming in from New York City. And he says, you mentioned you liked the Sphere in Las Vegas. Would you mind elaborating on what you thought about? Here's the backstory. I was invited down to, if anybody who lives in the Los Angeles area, if they've ever been to Burbank Airport recently, there's a dome, a gray dome near the parking lot. That's the mini Sphere. And that's where they were testing a lot of the tech that ultimately ended up in Las Vegas. I was invited to go down there to see it because I was just speaking to folks in our industry just to sort of get some feedback. And I got to experience sort of the inside workings of it. And I haven't actually been to the one in Vegas, but I assume it's fantastic. But they have this system called hollow points in there. From a sound perspective, it is phenomenal. They had an array of speakers that were maybe 30, 40 feet in front of me. And they had 3 spotlights on the ground. And they said, stand in spotlight number 1. And I listened to a movie and it was in German. I moved to spotlight number 2 was in English. To spotlight number 3 was in French, all in free air.
they have this unbelievable ability to actually pinpoint audio in free air using this system. And I can only imagine how they're actually utilizing it inside the sphere, but it is pretty phenomenal.
Next question.
From Robert Shoji here in Los Angeles. He says, what rules have you successfully broken when mixing sound?
Boy, where do I start? Gosh, I first of all, there are no rules. So to break the rule is kind of doesn't really exist. I think here's an example. We did the movie Hustlers, a Jennifer Lopez film, and the director had this idea that one of the girls inside Hustlers basically she's now becomes a plant for the FBI. So they wanted the whole scene to be as if you're hearing it under surveillance. But they never, ever showed the FBI or recording or anything, basically gave you the visual idea that you're actually meant to be under surveillance, that you're hearing it sort of as if it was a tiny little surveillance microphone. But we did this whole scene, but it's shot normally, like there's no visual indication. And so we went to town on it. We basically, it sounded horrible, but and scratchy and futzed and all that kind of good stuff. But it's a real scene. There's no camera, there's no visual equivalent of what the audio was doing. And a lot of the feedback that we got was fascinating. I had friends who saw it in the theater and they said, "I think you have a problem. You need to go and fix the sound. There's definitely a problem in the film." But that was an artistic intent. So did we break a rule? I guess we did, but some people got it. So I think that was kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. It's the director's idea, not my idea, and I think it's actually Jeannie's idea, and she's a very smart lady.
Next question.
Mickey McAchore in Manila in the Philippines. He says, with re-recording mixers being directed to mix louder, how do you monitor a Dolby Fader 7.0 on the cinema processor? What are your thoughts on mixers having to deviate from this?
I think any mixer who's been around for a while will, obviously the room's always at 85, unless you're doing like a 79 mix or an 82 mix for Netflix or one of the streamers. But if you're mixing theatrically, the room is always at 85. So if it's uncomfortable for everybody in the room, it's going to be uncomfortable for the audience. And you adjust it, and maybe you have a conversation with the director. My classic line with the director is that art is not measured in decibels. And so it's a give and take. But there are cases where you really want it to be a little more interesting. And there are directors out there like Christopher Nolan, for example, who has a very specific way that things are done. And the guys who are mixing his movies are very capable guys. But sadly, the sound effects are so loud that you just it's unsettling. But maybe that was his intent. I don't know. But for the most part, you can have a conversation with the director where it's not your job to. I consider our job sort of part of making sure that nobody walks off a cliff. And sometimes sometimes they have the tendency to do that. So part of what you need to do is to sort of have those conversations.
Next question.
From Robert Sababity in Poland. It says, John, how much in advance do you start planning the live events for post-production?
Depends upon the production. It depends. Each event is a thing unto itself. Who's involved, who's in charge. They all have a unique life. So there is no sort of one way of doing it. Sometimes they'll walk in with a completely finished thing, and then just ask you to just deal with what they have. And sometimes they will get involved pretty early on, and it's unique to every situation.
Next question.
Coming in from Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada, says, how do you compensate in mixes where in a cinema the left and right speakers are behind the projection screen, and in a playback environment with an LED screen, the speakers are outside the viewable image?
Yep. In a cinema, well, first of all, there's a thing called an X curve. That is an EQ curve that's basically compensating for screen loss, for the high frequency roll-off that would be occurring inside that, behind that screen. So what that is basically it's flat up to 2K and then down 2 dB per octave from 2K out. So you're going to mix brighter, and the intention is that by the time you finish mixing it, it'll be perfect coming through a perforated screen. In an LED screen situation, it would be you kind of have to. You don't necessarily need the X curve, depending upon where it's going to be consumed. There are other curves that might be more useful for you for smaller rooms. I assume that's what we're referring to. Although I know Samsung has developed a system where they actually bounce sound off a large LCD screen, and basically you're listening to the reflections of it, and it gives you the same sensation as being behind the screen. But basically, the X curve would compensate for that. So the whole idea is you mix what you like. If the room is set up correctly, you mix so that it sounds good.
Next question.
Next one comes in from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. It says, if someone comes to listen to the mix in your theater, where do you prefer them to sit? And how does a full audience change the sound in your mixing theater?
In this room, it doesn't really change at all. We've had anywhere from 1 person to 155 people in here. It doesn't really change the sound that much, and I think that's also part of the fact that my philosophy in building these rooms is to make them pretty dead. If you have a live room, you're gonna really feel that difference when people are in here. So the room is set up EQ wise to compensate for the fact that it's a relatively dead room to start with. So you're not going to get a lot of shift. Pretty much 2/3 of the way where the console is set up in a mixing environment is 2/3 of the way down the room, for the most part in the middle. And so that's the best seat in the house for most things. And in this case is like a maybe 30-foot radius around that is the best. And that would be true sort of scaling up or down in a motion picture theater.
Next question.
From Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. He says, how much will designing or planning for music become part of the creative process in movies, like in Baby Driver? I think it was wall-to-wall music.
Well, I mean, that film was designed around a song. I know the guys who did that film. It's totally dependent. I mean, I did some, for example, we did, often there'll be songs where literally the artists are singing along, the actors are singing along with something. Obviously, that was there from the get-go. And I did, like American Hustler, for example, has a lot of source music in it that's designed to be sort of emotional timestamping. A lot of that stuff was there right from the get-go as in what you want to be working with. But a lot of it was actually not. So we would sit and try various songs, and David or Russell would be sitting back and go, try this, try this, try this. And then there's a magic point where it just makes sense. But it's totally dependent. Like Baby Driver, more than likely, out of the source cues in the middle of the movie itself, were sort of discovered upon in the editorial process. But the main thematic pieces, which are also songs, were thought of way beforehand.
Next question.
From Mitchell Hill here on the panel in Wilmington, Delaware. John, what is your favorite classic movie for sound?
Classic movie for sound. Gosh. I have to think about that. Classic movie. Well, one of my favorite movies for sound was All Quiet on the Western Front, the one that just went by last year. Brilliant sound job done in Germany. Classic ones. I mean, there's so many good ones. The only thing, interestingly, going back to some of the older movies, which sound great, even the Star Wars pieces and everything, they sound great. Where you can really tell the difference is the quality of the dialogue. For the most part, we were far more accepting of junk, which we're not anymore. And so that's often something. But if you go back really, really far into sort of the film noir stuff, the dialogue is perfect because there was nothing really else going on, and it was shot so beautifully and all on sound stages. So I think one of my favorite sounding films is more like All Quiet on the Western Front.
And the last question for the hour.
From Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada, he says, you explain things very well. Do you think this has given you an advantage in your career?
It's given me advantage in my relationship with my wife. No, I'm joking. I think at the end of the day, when I say we break things down into three different categories in what we do, is technical, creative, and social. We're sitting in this room. You need to be able to communicate with directors and editors and folks that are involved in this process, because if they don't know what's inside your head, there's no way they can work with you. And so I think it comes with the territory.
John, thank you so much for your time. Really great to have you here.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us. And a reminder for people to download the Laurel Canyon Live app. Is that correct?
Laurel Canyon Live, and there's 1,000 tickets that you can use, and those tickets start with a capital T and then any 3-digit number between 001 and 999, and you can watch the show.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Give feedback if you like it.
Yeah, absolutely. So jump on that and give you. It's a great place for us to be able to test it and to take a look at it and see if it might make sense for some of our future projects. So, thanks again, John. Really, I've been waiting to. We've been trying to get John on for about a year, I think, like timing and schedules and everything else. So just really, really great to have you. Thanks to the panel. Thanks to our panelists. Of course, we can't do this without you. A great first hour and second hour. Thanks to our incredible producers who have asked all these questions from all over the world today. We really, we can't. The show gets really short without your questions, so we really appreciate it. And thanks to the incredible team. There's a small village that gets built up every single day here. It takes 15 to 20 people just to turn this show on. So we really appreciate the people who are cutting the show, managing the content for the show, developing the software for the show. All of those things are required to make this work, and we really appreciate all of your contribution. Answering these questions, we traveled 89,000 miles today, 143,000 kilometers, and that is 705 million bananas for scale. All right, let's go ahead and jump into After Hours.
Thank you.
John,
Thanks, John.
My favorite movie, classic style, would have been The Conversation with Gene Hackman.
Yes, no, that's definitely up there for sure.
That's where I got excited about
Arabia. Yeah. Where do you park all those cars in Laurel Canyon? That's what I want to know when you have this
far away.
Very far away.
Ask the valets. They know.
No, yeah. You'll never find them.
When you do productions, you're like, and you'll be really parking a mile away, and there'll be a little bus that'll take you up there. It all works out.
Yeah, no, it's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again, John.
All right, thanks so much. We'll see you guys.
See you later. All right,
See you, John. Good show.